Hello, my name is Brianna Pena. This is for the class EDTP 3301. This is the CAA number 3 historical timeline. So, Brown versus Board of Education took place in 1954. It talked about how the NAACP filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of Brown. This this outlawed segregated schools as inconsistent with equal education. So the justices declared that this segregation violated the 14th Amendment, which talks about guaranteed rights of all U.S. citizens regardless of color, was to be remembered as one of the cornerstones of civil rights movement and provided students equal educational opportunities. So it didn't matter what your color or race or sex was, it was supposed to be flat out students had equal educational opportunities. The National Defense Education Act of 1958. So this passed in response to Sputnik, and that talked about Sputnik was the satellite that demonstrated the Soviet Union's early lead in the space exploration. So this was the first effort at a national level to strengthen mathematics, science, and foreign language instruction. It provided funding to improve schools and promote post-secondary education, such as college. Civil Rights Act of 1964. This banned race, sex, and national origin discrimination in public facilities. People of color were no longer looked down upon, and it ended segregation. So that means there was no segregated lines, segregated schools, everything was one. Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. So this addressed the academic needs of poor children. It helped with improving schooling for English learners. It complicated the lines of authority among federal, state, and local officials over public officials. So what this means was that there was uncertainty that always persisted because of this, because federal authorities had begun to grapple with the problem of discrimination against English language learners in schools. The key components of this act was the funds, policies, and procedures that target students from low-income families. Bilingual Education Act of 1968. So this was passed January 2nd of 1968 by President Lyndon B. Johnson, who signed it. The U.S. government signaled its first commitment to assisting students with limited English skills. It provided grants to school districts and other eligible entities through a competitive grant process. It was an inclusion of all children of limited English-speaking ability. This act was key to changing the public's view on bilingual education from a compensatory program to an enrichment program. So it opened the public's eye on what bilingual education really was to do, and it was had more of a positive effect. Lay versus Nichols, 1974. This was the most important decision regarding the ELL education. So what this was Chinese Americans in San Francisco were placed in mainstream classrooms despite their lack of proficiency in English. They were essentially left to sink or swim in the classroom. The district argued that Chinese American students received treatment equal to that of others, but the justices disagreed and required districts to implement bilingual education programs to ELLs. So they had a fair, so once this case was important to ELL education because before this was passed, the teachers would just teach in their English and they really disregarded and thought they didn't think in consideration of the students who had trouble with learning the English language. Equal Educational Opportunities Act of 1974 requires school districts to take appropriate action to overcome language barriers that impede equal participation by its students in instructional programs, means that teaching of all children in English, regardless of their language abilities, no state shall deny educational opportunities to an individual on account of his or her race, color, sex, or national origin. Cerna versus Portales Municipal Schools, 1974. So the parents of Cerna filed a lawsuit against the school because the district's failure to provide bilingual education. So they are really upset that their daughter wasn't getting adequate education. This was against the Equal Education Act, as they claimed, and remedial action took place for the school district to implement bilingual education. So the outcome really was the school district started to implement bilingual education. Castanda versus Pickard, 1981. This was the right to bilingual education suffered in 1981, and this was a Texas court case. The federal court found that Raymondville School District fell short of meeting requirements of the EEOA. The court did not support the plaintiff's demands for bilingual education. The major outcome of this case was three-pronged tests to determine whether schools are taking appropriate action to address the needs of ELLs required by the EEOA. The Castanda standard has essentially become the law of the land in determining the adequacy of programs for ELLs. No Child Left Behind Act was implemented in 2001. This was President George W. Bush's plan for the reauthorization of the ESEA. Removed the word bilingual in the renaming of the Associated Office and Clearinghouse. They didn't really like the word bilingual. The NCLB uses the limited English proficient, the LEP label, depicting the students from a deficient view. And here are my cited sources.